the man who had it all, and the life he didn't. He stopped to buy flowers for a marriage proposal, and then saw his ex with 2 twin girls, who looked exactly like him. Hello everyone, welcome. If you're new here, remember to hit the like button and subscribe to our channel for more real-life dramas. Your support helps us create these stories for you. Now, let's get into it. The price of a lie. A poor single mother sold flowers to feed the son she raised alone. He had money, power, and everything the world could offer, less the truth about his own past. Helena survived abandonment with a smile on her face and the scent of daisies. Edward buried the mistakes of his youth under expensive suits and merciless decisions. But when he meets Noah, a little blonde boy with gray-blue eyes, something changes, and the memories he swore to forget come back to haunt him. A lie from the past. A love interrupted before it began. A reunion that starts with suspicion and ends with the birth of something true. But it's not all roses. A woman willing to do anything to maintain control. An accusation that can destroy. A mother and a boy at the center of a dispute no one wanted to live. This isn't just a story of a reunion. It's about love that blossoms even when everything seems lost. Prepare your heart. You will be moved by every detail. Subscribe to the channel and comment on which city you are listening from. The summer sun illuminated the cobblestone streets of the coastal town as Helena Dawson parked her yellow van in the central square. With skillful and graceful movements, she began to arrange the buckets of flowers on the sidewalk, forming a small plant rainbow that contrasted with the white walls and colorful doors of the colonial houses. "Noah, darling, can you hand me those sunflowers?" Helena asked, adjusting a lock of red hair that escaped her improvised bun. The 6-year-old boy, who was playing inside the van with a stuffed dinosaur, jumped out with the energy only children have. His gray-blue eyes sparkled as he carefully carried the bucket of sunflowers that were almost his size. "Mom, why do sunflowers always look at the sun?" he asked, tilting his head with curiosity. Helena smiled, revealing discreet freckles on her cheeks. "Because they know where to find the light, my love. They always follow what makes them grow." "Just like us coming to town?" Noah asked, making that surprising connection that children sometimes make. Helena paused, her denim jumpsuit stained with water droplets from the flowers. The question was innocent, but carried the weight of a story she was not yet ready to tell, completely. "Yes, a little like that," she finally answered. "We came to find our place in the sun." The truth was more complex. 7 years ago, Helena was a biology student in the city, with dreams of working in environmental preservation. A single night during a university party had changed everything. A guy with an easy smile who introduced himself as Ricardo, a passing publicist, an instant connection, deep conversations under the stars, and an impulsive romance that lasted only one night. When she found out she was pregnant weeks later, Ricardo had already disappeared without a trace. No phone number, no last name, and no social media profiles. Helena searched for him for months until she realized that maybe he had lied about everything. Rejected by her conservative parents when she decided to have the baby alone, she found a new start in this coastal town. It was small enough to raise her son in peace, but touristy enough to support her small flower business. "Look, Mom, that man is watching us." Noah's voice brought her back to the present. Helena looked up in the direction her son was pointing. Across the square, leaning against one of the colonial posts, was a man who completely stood out from the environment. Wearing an impeccably cut dark suit, sunglasses, and with a serious expression, he looked more like a lost executive than a common tourist. "Don't point, Noah," she gently scolded. "He must just be another visitor getting to know the town." The man, however, began to walk toward them. There was something in his posture, confident, almost arrogant, that made Helena feel an inexplicable pang of familiarity. "Good morning," he said. He approached, removing his sunglasses. "Those flowers are really impressive." Helena was momentarily speechless. His eyes, an intense dark green, contrasted with his neatly styled brown hair. There was something in that look that caused a strange sensation, like a distant memory trying to emerge. "Thank you," she finally replied, regaining her composure. "They are all grown in our small greenhouse on the outskirts of town." "You grow them yourselves?" he asked, genuinely impressed, crouching down to be at Noah's level. "And you, little guy, do you help with the flowers too?" "Yes, sir. I know all their names in Portuguese and in scientifics," Noah replied proudly. The man smiled, a smile that completely transformed his serious expression. "Scientifics? That's impressive." "It's Latin, actually," Helena gently corrected. "Noah has an incredible memory for scientific names. Sometimes I think I'll have a little botanist at home." "Or a big flower entrepreneur," the man retorted, still looking at Noah with an expression that was hard to decipher. "My name is Edward Miller," he finally said, extending his hand to Helena. "I'm staying in town for a few weeks. I think I'll need some flowers to brighten up my hotel room." "Helena Dawson," she replied, shaking his outstretched hand. A slight tingling ran down her arm at the brief contact. "And this is my son, Noah." Edward observed the boy for a few more moments, a slight frown crossing his face. "He has very peculiar eyes. They remind me of my family's." Helena felt an inexplicable discomfort. It must be a coincidence. They say there are only a few possible combinations of genes, right? "Certainly," Edward agreed, turning his attention back to the flowers. "I'll take those white lilies if you don't mind." While Helena prepared the bouquet, Noah continued to talk animatedly with the stranger, showing off his knowledge of flowers and asking if Edward had children. The boy's spontaneity always surprised Helena. He talked to anyone with the same openness and curiosity, perhaps unconsciously seeking the absent father figure in every man he met. "No, I don't have children," Edward replied, with a shadow of melancholy in his voice. "My life has been too complicated for that. My life is also complicated," Noah offered, with the innocent wisdom of children. "I don't have a dad, just a mom, but she's worth two." Helena felt her face burn. "Noah, that's a very personal conversation to have with strangers." Edward, however, did not seem bothered. On the contrary, there was a kindness in his gaze when he replied, "Your mother seems truly incredible. You make a great team." And after paying for the flowers, leaving a generous tip that Helena tried to refuse, Edward said goodbye, promising to return the next day to buy more arrangements for his hotel room. "He looked sad, didn't he, Mom?" Noah commented as they watched him walk away. "But he also seemed cool. I liked him." Helena nodded distractedly, still trying to understand the strange feeling that the encounter had provoked. There was something vaguely familiar about Edward Miller, something she couldn't pinpoint. In the days that followed, Edward became a frequent customer. He always appeared at the same time, bought a different arrangement, and talked briefly with Noah, who eagerly awaited his visits. To Helena's surprise, the reserved businessman began to bring small, educational gifts for the boy. An illustrated book about botany, a small pocket telescope to observe the stars, a magnifying glass to examine the flowers in detail. "You don't have to do that," Helena protested after the fourth visit, when Edward brought a children's microscope kit. "You're spoiling Noah too much." "I don't see how encouraging scientific curiosity can be spoiling him," Edward replied with a half-smile. "Besides, it's rare to find a child so interested in learning." There was something in the way Edward looked at Noah, a mixture of fascination and a deeper feeling that Helena couldn't name, that left her simultaneously touched and apprehensive. One particularly hot afternoon, Edward appeared outside his usual time. Helena was closing the van, ready to take Noah to the beach, when she saw him crossing the square. "I thought you had already left," he said, looking slightly disappointed. "We're closing early today. I promised Noah a swim in the sea after a whole week of work," Helena explained, noticing that Edward had swapped his usual suit for more casual clothes, light linen pants and a navy blue shirt that brought out his eyes. "Can I join you?" The question caught Helena by surprise. "Forgive my boldness, but I spent the whole morning in stuffy meetings, and the thought of a swim sounds like paradise right now." Before she could formulate a response, Noah had already jumped out of the van, his eyes shining with excitement. "Please, Mom, can Uncle Edward come with us?" Helena hesitated. They were developing a kind of friendship with this stranger, but a trip to the beach seemed to cross some invisible line of intimacy that she wasn't sure she wanted to cross. "I promise to behave," Edward joked, sensing her hesitation. "And I can buy ice cream to make up for the intrusion." Noah's hopeful smile was the deciding factor. "Okay, but you'll have to walk. The van is already full of our stuff." Chapter 2. The Beach and the Past. Trindade Beach, a few kilometers from the historic center, was relatively empty that weekday afternoon. Noah ran straight for the water, while Helena set up a small area with towels and a parasol. "Has he always had that much energy?" Edward asked, watching the boy jump between the small waves. "Ever since he was born," Helena confirmed, a fond smile softening her features. "Even as a baby, he barely slept. He was always alert, wanting to see everything." "It must have been difficult to raise a child alone," Edward commented carefully. Helena tensed slightly. She rarely talked about her situation with strangers, but something about Edward made her feel strangely comfortable sharing. "It was, but it's also the greatest joy of my life," she answered sincerely. "Noah gave me a purpose when I was lost." Edward seemed to want to ask more, but held back. Instead, he took off his shirt and ran to join Noah in the water, leaving Helena momentarily breathless. The businessman's well-defined body revealed a dedication to exercise that didn't match the image of a workaholic executive she had formed. Watching them play in the water, Helena felt a pang of emotion. Noah rarely had the opportunity to interact with a male figure like this. Seeing her son laugh as Edward tossed him up and caught him in the water was both beautiful and painful. A glimpse of what could have been if Ricardo hadn't disappeared from their lives. When they finally came out of the water, Noah was exhausted and hungry. Edward kept his promise and brought ice cream for everyone, sitting next to Helena while the boy devoured his popsicle. "He's really extraordinary," Edward commented, watching Noah draw shapes in the sand with a stick. "Smart, curious, kind. You've done an incredible job, Helena." "Thank you," she answered, genuinely touched by the compliment. "But a lot of it is simply who he is. I'm lucky to be the mother of someone so special." "And the father?" Edward hesitated, clearly unsure if the question would be welcome. Helena took a deep breath, looking out at the horizon. "He's not in his life. He never was." She paused, uncertain about how much to share. "It was a brief story. I don't even know if the name he gave me was real." Edward frowned, looking genuinely disturbed. "That's regrettable. No man should run from his responsibilities like that." There was something in the intensity of his reaction that made Helena look at him more closely. "You talk as if you have personal experience with the subject." "My own father wasn't exactly a model of responsibility," he replied after a moment. "He preferred his business and his lovers to his family. I grew up watching my mother suffer from his absences and betrayals." The unexpected vulnerability of the confession caught Helena off guard. This man with a cold and controlled appearance had his own scars, as deep as hers. "Is that why you don't have children?" Afraid of repeating patterns? She asked softly. Edward smiled humorlessly. A shrewd analysis for someone who has known me for so little time. But yes, perhaps that's part of the reason. The other part is simply never having found the right person. "Mom! Uncle Edward! Look what I found!" Noah's animated voice interrupted the intimate moment. The boy ran toward them, carefully holding something in his small hands. "A starfish!" he exclaimed, showing them the small orange creature. "Can we take it home?" "No, darling," Helena replied gently. "It belongs to the sea. It would be like taking a flower from the earth. It wouldn't survive away from its home." "Your mother is right," Edward agreed, crouching down to examine the discovery. "But we can take a picture for you to remember it, and then we'll return it to the ocean." Noah's face lit up at the suggestion. Edward took out his cell phone and photographed the boy carefully holding the sea animal. Then, he accompanied him to the water's edge to return it to the sea. Watching them, Helena felt something shift inside her. In less than 2 weeks, this stranger had walked into their lives and seemed to naturally fill spaces she hadn't even realized were empty. It was scary how easily Noah had become attached to him, and even scarier was the way she herself was starting to long for his daily visits. When they returned to the van, Noah fell asleep almost instantly in the back seat. "He's exhausted from the adventure. Thank you for the nice day," Helena said, as Edward said goodbye by his car, a discreet but clearly luxurious SUV parked nearby. "Noah loved your company." "The feeling is mutual," Edward replied, his gaze lingering on the sleeping boy. "He reminds me so much of myself as a child. The same insatiable curiosity, the same eyes." He paused abruptly, as if he had said too much. "Something wrong?" Helena asked, noticing his suddenly troubled expression. "No, nothing," he replied quickly. "Just memories. Helena, I need to travel on business for a few days, but I'd like to invite you and Noah to dinner when I get back, as a thank you for the pleasant afternoon." The proposal caught her off guard. "Edward, I don't know if that's a good idea. We barely know each other and—" "It's just dinner," he insisted softly. "In a public restaurant. I promise, no ulterior motives." There was something in his gaze, an almost vulnerable sincerity, that made Helena give in. "Okay, but nothing too fancy. Noah doesn't have formal clothes. I know the perfect place." Edward smiled, looking genuinely happy with her agreement. "I'll be back in a week. Until then, I'll miss the flowers and the conversations." As she drove back home, with Noah sleeping peacefully, Helena couldn't shake the feeling that something significant had changed that day. What had started as a simple customer-vendor relationship was evolving into something deeper. And no matter how much she tried to convince herself otherwise, she couldn't ignore the growing attraction she felt for Edward Miller, or the way her heart sped up every time he smiled. Even more disturbing was the vague sense of familiarity that occasionally assaulted her when she watched him, as if she had known him in another life or another time. A persistent déjà vu she couldn't explain. What Helena couldn't imagine was that, as he drove to his hotel, Edward was facing his own demons. In the rearview mirror, the image of Noah sleeping peacefully in the van persisted in his mind, stirring up questions and suspicions he had never before considered, and that could change the course of their lives forever. Chapter 3. The truth unravels. Edward looked at the mountainous landscape through the airplane window, but his mind was miles away. Since he had left 3 days ago, he couldn't stop thinking about Helena and Noah, especially Noah. There was something about the boy that deeply disturbed him, an inexplicable resemblance that went beyond the gray-blue eyes, so similar to the ones he saw in old photographs of his childhood. It was his manner, his curiosity, even the shape of his smile. "Mr. Miller, we are beginning our descent into the city. the flight attendant informed him, interrupting his thoughts. Edward nodded mechanically. The business trip, which was supposed to last a whole week, had been drastically cut short. He had canceled important meetings, delegating urgent tasks to subordinates, all to return to the coastal town as quickly as possible. "I need to ask some questions," he murmured to himself as he adjusted his seatbelt. But what would be the right questions? How do you approach such a delicate suspicion without offending Helena or sounding completely insane? "Hello, by the way. We met 7 years ago at a university party, where I introduced myself with a different name." There was no elegant way to do it. Besides, Edward wasn't sure if he wanted answers. The last few years had been dedicated to rebuilding his image and that of his family's company, completely moving away from the young and irresponsible man he once was. The Ricardo who would invent identities at university parties to escape the weight of being a miller. In his city apartment, Edward opened the safe embedded in the wall of his office and took out a small wooden box. Inside, he kept a few sentimental objects, including a small picture frame with a photo of himself at 6 years old, taken during a trip to Paris. The resemblance to Noah was undeniable. His phone rang, interrupting his moment of contemplation. The name Caroline flashed on the screen. "Where are you?" Caroline Foster's voice sounded irritated. "You canceled dinner with the investors without notice?" "Something came up," Edward replied dryly. Caroline was technically his ex-fiancée, although they continued to work together at the company, and she seemed convinced that the temporary break they had decided to take in their relationship was just that, temporary. What kind of unplanned event is more important than the merger with the Rivera Group? She questioned. "A personal matter, Caroline. I'm going back to the coastal town early tomorrow." "The coastal town? I thought the assessment of the inn was already complete. What else is there that requires your personal presence?" The question, laced with suspicion, made Edward realize how much his relationship with Caroline had deteriorated. There was no more trust, just demands and professional expectations. "I need to check some details of the property," he lied, not ready to share his suspicions. "We'll talk when I get back." After hanging up, Edward spent hours searching on his computer. First, he tried to find online records for Helena Dawson. He found an abandoned academic profile at the University of the City in the biology department, with a photo that confirmed it. It was definitely the same Helena. The dates matched. 7 years ago, he was still in his rebellious phase, attending university parties where no one knew him as Edward Miller, the problematic heir. That specific year, he vaguely remembered a party in the biology department, where he had met a red-haired student with green eyes. The memory was hazy, a result of the drinking and the wild life he led, but he recalled the instant connection, the deep conversations under the stars, how she seemed genuinely interested in Ricardo the publicist, not in the Miller money. "My God," he murmured, the reality of the situation finally hitting him completely. Noah could be my son. In the coastal town, Helena was arranging flowers in the van when Ms. Sita, a woman who sold handicrafts in the neighboring square, approached with a curious expression. "So, young lady, is it true that you and the businessman from the city are in a romance?" Helena almost dropped a pot of orchids. "What? Of course not. Where did you get that idea?" "Oh, the whole town is talking. Teresa from the bakery saw you at the beach, all smiles and intimacy, and he comes to buy flowers every day. A man who buys flowers daily is either in love or guilty of something." Helena felt her face burn. "Edward is just a client. We met him at the beach by coincidence. That's all." "If you say so," Ms. Sita smiled slyly. "But he would be a good catch, wouldn't he? A handsome man, well-mannered, and from what they say, very rich." "I'm not looking for a good catch, Ms. Sita. I'm too busy raising my son and running my business." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Noah, returning from school with his teacher, Louisa, who occasionally walked him to the van. "Look what I drew today, Mom," the boy exclaimed, proudly displaying a colorful drawing. "It's our family." Helena looked at the image. 3 stick figures, one with curly red hair, a small one with blonde hair, and a third, taller one, with what looked like a suit. "It's very pretty, darling," she replied carefully. "But who is this one?" she asked, pointing to the man's figure. "It's Uncle Edward, of course," Noah replied, as if it were obvious. "Louisa asked us to draw our family, and since I don't have a dad, I drew Uncle Edward. He's cool, like a dad would be, right?" Helena exchanged an awkward glance with the teacher, who smiled apologetically. "Darling, Edward is just a friend we met recently," Helena explained softly. "He's not part of our family." The disappointment on Noah's face was like a stab. "But he could be, couldn't he? You smile differently when he's around. You smile like my friends' moms do when their dads come home." Helena was speechless, surprised by her son's perceptive observation. Was she that transparent? "Children notice more than we give them credit for," Louisa commented quietly, as Noah was distracted by showing his drawing to Ms. Sita. "He talks about Edward constantly at school." "We've known each other for less than 2 weeks," Helena sighed. "And he's from another world, a city businessman. He's probably just passing the time while he finishes his business." "Well, judging by the car that just parked over there," Louisa replied, pointing discreetly. "He's back sooner than you expected." Helena turned and saw Edward getting out of his SUV across the square. He had swapped his usual suit for khaki pants and a simple white shirt, looking more relaxed, but at the same time strangely tense. "Uncle Edward!" Noah's enthusiastic shout attracted everyone's attention in the square. The boy ran toward the businessman, who broke into a wide smile at the sight of him, crouching down to greet him with a hug. "Hello, champ. I missed you. You came back early. Mom said you wouldn't be back until next week," Noah commented, pulling his hand toward the van. "I changed my plans," Edward replied, his gaze finding Helena's in the distance. There was something different in that look, a disturbing, almost investigative intensity. As they approached, Helena noticed that Edward seemed different. It wasn't just the more casual clothes, but something in his posture, in the way he was looking at her, as if he were seeing her for the first time. "Welcome back," she greeted, trying to keep her voice casual. "Noah will be happy to have you around. He hasn't stopped talking about Uncle Edward these past few days." "We need to talk," he replied in a low voice, just for her to hear. In private. The seriousness in his tone made Helena frown. "Did something happen?" "Yes. No. Maybe." Edward ran a hand through his hair, a nervous gesture that seemed out of place in someone normally so composed. "It's complicated. Uncle Edward, look at the drawing I made at school," Noah interrupted, momentarily saving them from the awkward moment. Edward examined the drawing, and Helena could see the instant emotion in his eyes when he realized who the third figure was. He swallowed hard, clearly touched. "It's incredible, Noah. You have talent," he finally said, his voice slightly choked. "We can go to dinner tonight." "You promised that before you left," the boy reminded him, tugging on his shirt sleeve. Edward looked at Helena, as if asking for permission. She nodded slightly. Maybe a public dinner would be the ideal place for that private conversation. "What?" he wanted to say. "Of course, champ. How about at 7? I know a restaurant by the sea that serves delicious fish." After Edward walked away, promising to pick them up later, Helena felt restless for the rest of the afternoon. What did he want to talk about? Had he discovered something about her past? Was he bothered by Noah's attachment? At 6:30, already ready for dinner in a simple blue floral dress that brought out her green eyes. Helena was helping Noah put on his sneakers when the phone rang. "Hello?" A cold, unfamiliar female voice answered on the other end. "This is Caroline Foster, executive assistant to Edward Miller." Helena felt a shiver run down her spine. "Yes? How can I help you?" "Edward asked me to let you know that he had to cancel tonight's plans. An emergency came up in the city that requires his immediate presence." "Oh!" The disappointment was instantaneous, especially when she thought about how upset Noah would be. "I see. Thank you for letting me know. I'd also like to take this opportunity to clarify something," the voice continued, now with a slightly threatening tone. "Edward is in a crucial phase of negotiations for the Miller companies. Distractions are inconvenient." "Distractions?" Helena repeated, feeling her blood boil. "I don't know what you're talking about, but I can assure you we're not distracting anyone." "Good. Then we understand each other. Have a good night, Miss Foster." The call was disconnected before Helena could reply. Feeling humiliated and confused, she looked at Noah, who was tying his shoelaces with his tongue sticking out in concentration. "Darling, I have some bad news. Edward won't be able to come tonight." The boy's face fell. "But he promised." "Sometimes adults have work emergencies," Helena explained, feeling terrible. "But you know what we can do? Have our own special night. We can order pizza and watch that dinosaur movie you love so much." The proposal didn't completely erase the disappointment, but Noah eventually agreed. While they ate pizza on the small living room sofa, Helena couldn't stop thinking about the strange call. Who was Caroline Foster, and why did she call instead of Edward himself? The threatening tone suggested more than a simple professional relationship. Her suspicion was confirmed when, after finally putting Noah to sleep, she heard a knock at the door. When she opened it, she found Edward looking agitated and confused. "What are you doing here? I thought you went back to the city," Helena said, keeping her voice low so as not to wake Noah. "The city? What are you talking about?" "I just went to take care of a few details at the hotel so I could meet you. I came to pick you up for dinner. Your assistant, Caroline, called to cancel everything. She said you had an emergency." Edward's expression hardened instantly. "Caroline is not my assistant. She's my ex-fiancée, and she had no authorization to speak on my behalf." Helena felt as if the ground had disappeared beneath her feet. "Ex-fiancée? It's complicated?" Edward ran a hand through his hair, again, the nervous gesture that Helena was starting to recognize. "May I come in? We need to talk, and clearly now there's more to clarify." Reluctantly, Helena let him in. The small apartment above the flower shop she rented seemed even smaller, with Edward's imposing presence. She gestured to the sofa and sat in the opposite armchair, maintaining a deliberate distance. "So you have an ex-fiancée who still acts as if she has rights to your life," Helena began, unable to hide the hurt in her voice. "And she clearly sees Noah and me as threats. Caroline and I broke up 3 months ago, but we continue to work together at the company. Edward hesitated. She has difficulty accepting the end of the relationship." "And why did you break up with her?" The question escaped before Helena could contain it. "Because I realized I was with her for the wrong reasons. Convenience, family pressure, professional compatibility." Edward looked directly into Helena's eyes. There was no love, just an arrangement. The silence hung between them for a few moments. "That's not why I came to talk," Edward finally continued. "Helena, I need to ask you a question, and I ask that you be completely honest, no matter how strange it may sound." Helena's heart raced. "What question?" 7 years ago, he began slowly. "You were at a party at the university's biology department, and you met a man who introduced himself as Ricardo, a publicist. The shock was so great that Helena had to hold on to the armchair to keep from falling. Her face instantly went pale. How could you possibly know about that? She whispered, her voice trembling. Because I was Ricardo, Edward replied, his voice a mix of confession and regret. I was going through a rebellious phase, where I would frequent university parties using fake identities. It was my way of escaping the pressure of being a miller. Helena stood up abruptly, stumbling back as if she had been slapped. No, it can't be. This is some kind of sick joke. It's no joke. When I saw you in the square with Noah, I felt something familiar, but I couldn't identify it. It was only later, observing Noah, noticing our similarities, that the memories started to come back. You lied to me. You disappeared. I looked for you. Helena's voice rose dangerously before she remembered Noah sleeping. I looked for you for months, she continued in a furious whisper. I didn't know, Edward replied, clearly shaken. I swear I didn't know there were consequences to that night. I was drunk, confused, and the next morning I was practically kidnapped by security guards my father hired to take me back home. He sent me to London the same week for a rehabilitation program. 7 years, Edward. Helena gritted her teeth, tears of rage glistening in her eyes. For 7 years I raised Noah alone, abandoned by my family, struggling to survive while you lived your privileged life without consequences. I know nothing I can say can erase that, Edward admitted, his voice full of regret. But I'm here now, and I want to take responsibility. Noah is my son, isn't he? The direct question disarmed Helena. It was the first time anyone had verbalized this truth so clearly. Judging by your reaction when you saw him, by the coincidence of dates, and by the sudden obsession you developed for us, you already know the answer, she replied bitterly. Edward covered his face with his hands, a mix of conflicting emotions evident in his posture. When he finally looked up, his eyes were wet. He's incredible, Helena. You did an extraordinary job. I don't need your compliments, she retorted, rage simmering beneath the surface. What do you want now? To show up in his life after 7 years and pretend you were always there? I want to be a part of his life, Edward answered calmly. In any way you allow, at a pace that is best for Noah. And I want to help you financially to make up for the years of absence. We don't want your money, Helena shot back instantly. I know you don't. That just proves how extraordinary you are. Edward stood up, maintaining a respectful distance. I'm not asking you to decide anything now. I'm just asking you to consider what's best for Noah. Every child deserves to know their father, don't you think? The question hit Helena at her most vulnerable point. How many times had Noah asked about his father? How many improvised stories had she told, promising that one day she would explain everything? I need time, she said finally. This is too much to process in one night. I understand completely, Edward nodded. I will take some steps to officially confirm paternity, DNA tests, legal documents, but I promise not to do anything without your prior consent. When Edward left, leaving his card with personal contact numbers, Helena collapsed onto the sofa, trembling uncontrollably. The life she had so carefully built was being turned upside down. What do you think will happen next? Do you believe Helena will trust Edward after all the lies? Chapter 4. A Mother's Strength. A Sunday morning dawned sunny in the coastal town. Helena, however, had barely slept. The revelations of the past few days weighed heavily on her thoughts as she prepared breakfast, watching Noah draw at the small kitchen table, oblivious to the emotional storms brewing around him. Mom, can we go to the park today? He asked, without taking his eyes off his colorful paper. I want to show Uncle Edward my new kite. Helena took a deep breath, gathering the courage for the conversation she could no longer postpone. Noah, we need to talk about Uncle Edward. The boy looked up, instantly attentive. Helena sat in front of him, searching for the right words. Remember when you asked me about your dad? And I said he lived very far away? Noah nodded slowly. You said he didn't know about me, that he had left before he knew I was in your tummy. That's right. Helena held her son's small hands in hers. What if I told you that your dad is back, that he found out about you and wants to meet you? Noah's gray-blue eyes widened. My dad is back? For real? Where is he? What does he look like? The eagerness in his voice was palpable, making Helena's heart ache. You already know him, darling. It's Edward. The silence that followed was profound. Noah blinked several times, processing the information. Then, to Helena's surprise, a huge smile lit up his face. I knew it! Deep down, I knew it! He exclaimed, jumping out of his chair in excitement. That's why he's so nice to me. That's why we have the same eyes. Mom, my dad is Uncle Edward. The boy's genuine joy caught Helena off guard. She had expected confusion, maybe hurt for having hidden the truth, but not this instant and enthusiastic acceptance. Noah, it's important to understand that it's a little more complicated. Edward didn't know about you until recently. He and I met a long time ago, before he was who he is today. But now he knows, right? And he wants to be my dad. The hope in Noah's voice was almost painful to hear. He wants to get to know you better, yes, Helena replied carefully. But we need to take it slow. You two need to get to know each other for real first. Can I call him Dad now? The innocent question made Helena hesitate. Maybe it's better to wait a little while, until you get to know each other better. For now, keep calling him Uncle Edward, okay? Noah agreed, although clearly disappointed. Can we see him today? I want to show him all my drawings and my books, and tell him that he's my dad. Let's take it easy, my love. Helena stroked her son's blonde hair. First, let's finish breakfast. Then you can help me with the flowers in the greenhouse. Later, we'll see if we can talk to Edward, okay? Meanwhile, Edward walked along the Parati waterfront, trying to organize his thoughts. The confrontation with Caroline the day before had been exhausting. After getting her away from Helena, he had taken her to the hotel and made it absolutely clear that their relationship was definitively over and that her interference was unacceptable. You can't be seriously considering getting involved with that florist, Caroline had responded with disdain. What would your mother say? The board? The shareholders? I don't care, Edward had answered, with a conviction that surprised even himself. For the first time in my life, I'm making decisions based on what's right, not on what's convenient for business or for the family's image. Caroline had left the coastal town that same night, but not before threatening. This isn't over, Edward. There's a lot more at stake than you think. Now, watching the waves break on the beach, Edward was trying to formulate a plan. Helena had every right to distrust him. He had disappeared, even without knowing about the pregnancy. He had lied about his identity. Winning back her trust would be a challenge, but he was determined to try. Even more urgent was establishing a relationship with Noah, his son. The idea still left him stunned. For years, he had avoided fatherhood, convinced that he wouldn't be able to be better than his own absent father. And now he discovered he was already a father to a brilliant, kind, and curious boy who had, somehow, grown up magnificently without his presence. His phone vibrated in his pocket. His mother's name, Teresa Miller, flashed on the screen. He hesitated before answering. News about Caroline had certainly already reached her. Edward, what's this story Caroline told me? Teresa's authoritative voice left no room for pleasantries. A florist and a child in the coastal town? Have you completely lost your mind? Good morning to you too, Mom, he replied dryly. Caroline should learn not to meddle in matters that don't concern her. She's worried about you, as we all are. This erratic behavior, canceling important meetings, extending your stay in a tourist town. "Mom, I have a son," Edward interrupted, deciding there was no gentle way to break the news. The silence on the other end of the line was absolute. "A 6-year-old boy," he continued, "the result of an encounter I had before I went to London. I only found out recently, by coincidence." Coincidence? Teresa's voice now sounded dangerously calm. "Or a well-laid trap." "Edward, you are a Miller, the heir to an empire. How many women have tried to trick you with similar stories?" The implication made Edward's blood boil. "Helena is not that kind of person. She didn't even know who I really was when we met. And you only have to look at Noah to see he's my son. He has the same eyes, the same chin, even the same mannerisms." "Appearances can be deceiving. We need concrete proof, DNA tests, background checks." "I've already started the process for the DNA, but not because I doubt it, just to formalize it legally. As for background checks, I will not turn the mother of my son into a suspect of some imaginary crime." Teresa sighed heavily. "Come to the city immediately. We need to discuss this in person, with the family lawyers. I'm not asking for your permission, Mom. I'm stating a fact. I have a son, and I intend to be part of his life. And the support? I suppose she has already demanded astronomical amounts." Edward laughed without humor. "Actually, she refused my first offer. She said they didn't need my money." This, finally, seemed to silence Teresa for a moment. "I'm hanging up now, Mom. I have a lot to sort out here." After the call, Edward felt simultaneously exhausted and strangely light. The control his family had exerted over him for years was weakening, not out of rebellion, as in his youth, but out of a greater purpose, his son. Lost in thought, he almost didn't notice the small blonde tornado running toward him on the beach. "Dad!" Noah's enthusiastic shout echoed, making Edward freeze in place. The boy threw himself into his arms with such force he almost knocked them both over. Automatically, Edward wrapped him in a hug, feeling a wave of emotion so intense that his eyes welled up. "Mom told me! She told me you're my dad!" Noah spoke quickly, practically bouncing with excitement. "I knew it! I knew I had a dad somewhere!" Edward looked over his son's head and saw Helena approaching slowly. She looked nervous, perhaps regretting the decision to tell the truth so quickly. "Noah, what did we agree on? About calling Edward Dad?" she asked softly as she approached. "But he is my dad," Noah protested, refusing to let go of Edward. "And now he knows, and I know, so I can call him that." Edward met Helena's gaze, silently asking for guidance. She sighed, shrugging in surrender. "It seems like someone has already made your decision," she said with a small, sad smile. "Come, let's sit down," Edward suggested, pointing to a nearby wooden bench. With Noah still firmly attached to his hand, the three of them sat down, the boy purposefully positioning himself between them. "I'm sorry," Helena murmured. "I thought it would be better to tell him right away, before he found out another way. I didn't expect such an enthusiastic reaction." "Don't be sorry," Edward replied, still amazed by the situation. "I'm glad you told him." "Dad, are you going to live with us now?" Noah asked abruptly. The innocent question created an awkward silence. Edward searched for the right words. "Noah, your mom and I are getting to know each other again," he explained carefully. "And I'm getting to know you too. This is all new for all of us. For now, I'll continue to stay at the hotel, but we can see each other every day, if your mom allows it." "But families live together," Noah insisted, with the simple, direct logic of children. "Not all of them," Helena gently interjected. "Some families are different. The important thing is that people love and respect each other, even if they live in separate places." Noah seemed to consider this for a moment. Then you don't love each other? The question caught both adults off guard. It's complicated, darling, Helena replied, feeling her face burn. Your mom and I met a long time ago, in very different circumstances, Edward added. Now we are getting reacquainted and learning about who we are today. The most important thing is that we both love you. This seemed to satisfy Noah for the moment. In the days that followed, they established a routine. Edward visited regularly, bringing small educational gifts and, little by little, getting to know his son. Helena watched their interactions, surprised by how easily Noah had accepted Edward into his life. On one particularly difficult afternoon, Helena received an urgent phone call. Ms. Saida, the lady who sold handicrafts near her van, had been hospitalized after a sudden fainting spell. I need to go see her. Can you stay with Noah? Helena asked, hesitant. Of course, we'll be fine, Edward replied, trying to hide his own nervousness at the prospect of being alone with his son for the first time. During Helena's absence, father and son strengthened their bond. They made an impromptu dinner and played board games. And Edward patiently answered the countless questions about his childhood, his family, and, most importantly, why he had been absent for so long. I didn't know about you, he explained honestly. If I had known, I would have come back much sooner. Mom tried to find you, Noah revealed. She told me she looked for a long time, but you had disappeared. The guilt hit Edward deeply. I was irresponsible at the time, but I promise you that I'm here now and I'm not going anywhere. When Helena returned that night, she found them asleep on the sofa, with a whale documentary still playing on the television. Thank you for staying, she said sincerely after Noah was in bed. I know it must have been strange to suddenly find yourself alone with him. It was the best day of my life, Edward confessed. He's incredible, Helena, and that's thanks to you. A moment of intimacy hung between them, not an echo of the past, but something new, born from the maturity the years had brought. The peace, however, was short-lived. Days later, while arranging flowers in the van, Helena was approached by a man in a suit who was visibly out of place in the casual atmosphere of the town. I'm Paul Mendez, a lawyer for the Miller family, he introduced himself, handing her an envelope. This is a formal notification. Mrs. Teresa Miller is requesting the immediate completion of a DNA test and proposes a temporary visitation agreement. Helena felt her blood run cold. We've been getting along fine without legal documents until now. Mrs. Miller believes in formal procedures, the lawyer replied. There's also a generous financial proposal to ensure the minor's well-being during this process. I won't sign anything without talking to Edward first, Helena stated firmly. And tell Mrs. Miller that we are not for sale. What do you think of Teresa Miller's actions? Is she right to be cautious? Or is she meddling in a relationship that is not hers? Chapter 5. The Stolen Son. Edward returned from the city furious when he discovered his mother's interference. Helena, I swear I didn't know. She lured me to the city with a fake business emergency. Her lawyer showed up with visitation agreement documents. Is that how your family handles things? Unfortunately, yes. I confronted my mother immediately. It was explosive. I told her that if she tried to interfere in my relationship with you and Noah, I would give up everything. The companies, the inheritance, the Miller name. You wouldn't do that, Helena replied, skeptical. I would, without hesitation. Edward's gaze met hers, with an intensity that made her heart race. I've spent my whole life trying to be the perfect son, the ideal heir. Putting the company's interests above my own happiness. I won't make that mistake with my own son. The situation became even more complicated when they discovered that Caroline was spreading rumors in the business circle, insinuating that Helena had set a trap to catch a Miller. Simultaneously, Louisa, Noah's teacher, reported that an elegant woman had visited the school, asking questions about him under the pretext of offering educational scholarships. "It's Caroline," Edward confirmed. "She's collecting evidence, probably for some kind of custody battle." The nightmare materialized on a sunny Thursday. Noah was not at the school when Helena went to pick him up. "He left with his dad," the secretary said casually. "Mr. Miller came early, said there was a family emergency." The panic was instantaneous. "I didn't authorize that. And Edward is in a meeting in Angra dos Reis today." With trembling hands, Helena called Edward, who immediately returned to the city. The small town mobilized. Fishermen checked the coast. Merchants looked in every alley. Tourists were alerted about a missing blonde boy. It was early evening, as hope began to fade, that Edward's phone rang. "Edward, it's me, Caroline. I have your son." At the hotel, they found Noah calmly watching cartoons and eating ice cream, apparently oblivious to the chaos he had caused. "Aunt Carol was nice," he explained innocently. "She said she was friends with you guys and had a surprise." Caroline appeared impeccably dressed and with an expression of false surprise. "Oh, you're here early. We were having such a nice afternoon." Edward confronted her furiously. "If you weren't in front of my son, I would show you exactly how much this has gone beyond any acceptable limit." Caroline didn't back down. Instead, she presented an envelope containing compromising photos of Edward's past and documents about the family's business, with annotations about possible irregularities. "If you accuse me of anything, these documents will go to the press and to juvenile court," she threatened. "What I want is the presidency of the Miller Companies, the marriage you promised me, and this small, inconvenient person kept at a distance." What Caroline didn't realize was that Noah was quietly recording the conversation on the cell phone Edward had recently given him for emergencies. "Aunt Carol, why are you being mean to my dad and my mom?" the boy asked innocently. "I'm not being mean, darling. I'm just protecting what's important." "Like money?" Noah continued with surprising shrewdness. "You said on the phone that you were going to take all of Dad's money." Edward immediately realized what was happening. "Did you record Aunt Carol's conversation?" Noah nodded proudly. "You always say we should gather evidence when someone does something wrong." Caroline paled. "This is ridiculous. A child's word against mine." "It's not just his word," Edward countered, taking the cell phone. "It's a recording. And believe me, Caroline, that's enough to destroy any chance you had of getting near the Miller Companies again." Noah's recording never had to be made public. The simple threat was enough for Caroline to disappear from the scene. She was transferred to a distant branch of the company after a decisive conversation between Edward and Teresa. The matriarch Miller, against all expectations, ended up visiting the town to meet her grandson. The encounter, initially tense, softened when Noah, with his characteristic innocence, asked if she also liked flowers, offering her a small bouquet he had selected himself. "He has the Miller charm," Teresa commented to Helena after dinner in a rare moment of intimacy. "But he has your heart, your strength. You did a beautiful job raising him." "Thank you," Helena replied, genuinely touched by the unexpected acknowledgement. At the flower shop, a subtle transformation occurred. The yellow van was still parked in the central square, but now it was just part of a larger operation. Edward had helped Helena acquire her own space, not as a gift, but as a joint investment. Flowers of Destiny became the official name of the business, which now supplied arrangements to hotels and events throughout the region. On a Sunday afternoon, while Noah played on the beach under the watchful eye of Teresa, who had surprisingly discovered a genuine pleasure in her grandson's company, Edward took Helena for a walk through the historic center. "Do you remember the first day we saw each other here?" he asked, stopping in the same square where the van used to park. "How could I forget? You were the mysterious man in a suit watching me in the van, Helena replied, smiling at the memory. I was completely lost that day, Edward confessed. Not just in town, but in life. And then I saw you, this extraordinary woman with fire-colored hair, surrounded by flowers, and with a boy so much like me, I thought I was hallucinating. Helena laughed softly. I thought you were just another rich tourist, trying to add a touch of local color to your hotel room. And now? What do you think of me now? Edward asked, his voice suddenly serious. Helena considered the question, observing the man in front of her. No longer the elegant stranger, nor the irresponsible youth she had known in her younger days, but someone who had proven, day after day, his determination to be better, to build something true. I think you're the man who proved that second chances exist, she finally replied. The man Noah loves to call Dad, the man who against all odds made me believe in love again. Edward took a small box from his pocket. It's not an engagement ring, he explained before opening it. It's still too early for that, and we need to build our story at our own pace. Inside the box was a delicate chain with a sunflower-shaped pendant. It's a promise, he continued, that, like the sunflower, I will always seek the light that you and Noah brought into my life. Helena allowed him to place the chain around her neck, the cold metal contrasting with the warmth that spread through her chest. I don't know what the future holds for us, Edward said, taking her hands in his. There will be challenges, adjustments, difficult moments, but I know I want to face every single one of them by your side, building not just a family for Noah, but a home for all of us. In response, Helena did what her heart had been wanting to do for weeks. She leaned in and kissed him. Not a kiss of reunion with the past, but a kiss of promise for the future. In the distance on the beach, Noah watched the two of them with Teresa at his side. See, I told you they loved each other, the boy commented, with the absolute certainty of children. Teresa smiled, a genuine smile that softened the severe lines of her face. I think you were right from the start, Noah. Now we're a complete family, he declared, turning his attention back to the sandcastle he was building. Yes, Teresa agreed, watching her son and Helena walking hand in hand through the square. A complete family. And so, among the colorful flowers and the cobblestone streets of the coastal town, a new story began to bloom. Not the perfect story of fairy tales, but a real story, built on difficult truths, brave choices, and, above all, on a love that, like the flowers Helena cultivated, needed daily care, patience, and faith to reveal its full beauty.